What if the person you trusted most was the one who tried to destroy you, and the one who saved you had been gone for years? It was supposed to be just another morning, the kind where nothing happens. The kind Clara Monroe had walked through hundreds of times without thinking twice. At exactly 6 o'clock, she stepped out of her family's estate and turned onto Sam Jackson Street, the same lonely road she always took to school. Everything looked the same, bare trees lining the sidewalk, windows still dark, the air thick with early spring mist. But there was something about the silence that day. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. Not empty in the usual way, but in a way that made her chest tighten. She pulled her coat tighter and picked up her pace. Her polished shoes tapped against the pavement, echoing louder than they should have. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. It made no sense. There was no one around. But she couldn't deny what she felt. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around you too tightly, as if the air itself was holding its breath. And then she heard it. Clara. Her name, spoken low, rough, and just behind her. She froze. For a long second, she couldn't breathe. The voice didn't sound familiar. It sounded old. Fragile, but steady. Clara turned slowly, her eyes searching the foggy path behind her. At first, she saw nothing. Then, from the mist, a figure emerged. An old woman stood several feet away, hunched over a crooked walking stick. Her frame was small, almost frail, but her presence was overwhelming. She wore a thick grey shawl, her hair wild and silver, and her eyes, those eyes, were locked onto Clara's with a strange intensity that made her stomach turn. Clara took a step back, unsure whether to run or speak. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she took one shaky step forward, and just like that, the distance between them was gone. She was standing right in front of Clarano Sound, no movement. She was simply there. Clara blinked. She hadn't seen her move, hadn't heard a single step. But the woman was close enough now that Clara could see the deep lines carved into her face, the way her knuckles trembled as she held something out toward her. A small bottle, glass, dark blue, sealed tight with a gold cap. "Take this," the woman said, her voice now clear and commanding. "Rub it over your skin before you reach school. It will save you." Clara stared at the bottle. She didn't move. "Save me from what?" she asked, her heart racing. The woman said nothing else. Her hand shook slightly, still offering the bottle. Then, slowly, she bent down and placed it on the ground at Clara's feet. Before Clara could say another word, the woman turned and walked away. No. She didn't walk. She disappeared, gone. Into thin air. Clara spun around, looking in every direction. There was no trace of her. The street was empty again, just as it had been when she first left the house. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her hands trembled as she crouched down to pick up the bottle. It looked ordinary. There was no label, no note. Just a faint, unfamiliar scent, something earthy, something old. She held it in her hand, unsure what to do. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe someone was watching her, waiting for her to use it. Maybe this whole thing was part of some twisted prank, but something inside her, something she didn't have a name for, told her this was real. Whatever had just happened wasn't normal. And this bottle, this strange, quiet gift, it wasn't meaningless. She slipped it into her coat pocket. By the time she arrived at Blossom Breed High, the sun had started to rise. As always, she was the first to step through the gates. She let out a breath, half a laugh, trying to shake the strange encounter. Maybe it was a dream, a weird dream, or a hallucination. Maybe she hadn't slept as well as she thought. She made it to the school steps. Nothing had happened. The street was behind her. The woman was gone. The bottle was still in her pocket. And just as she took her next step forward, a hand tapped her shoulder. She turned, and her world would never be the same again. Clara barely had time to blink. The hand that had tapped her shoulder was gone, replaced by something far more terrifying. Just inches away stood a mantle, broad-shouldered, face hidden behind a dark mask. For a split second she stared at him, frozen. The morning mist swirled around them, the schoolyard still empty. Then came the movement. Sudden, violent. He threw a liquid from a metal flask straight into her face. It hit her with a sizzling splash. The world went white with pain. Clara's scream tore through the empty air. The burning sensation was like nothing she had ever known. Her hands flew to her face instinctively, trying to wipe it away, but the pain only grew. Her skin felt like it was melting. Her eyes, her cheeks, her neck, everything was on fire. She stumbled backward, blinded, disoriented, heart pounding like a drum. The masked man vanished into the fog as quickly as he'd come. No footsteps, no trace, just gone. Clara staggered across the schoolyard, screaming, crying, clawing at her face. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the acrid scent of chemicals filled her nose. She needed help. She needed water. She needed this nightmare to end. She crashed through the doors of the school building and turned instinctively toward the girls' bathroom. Her feet pounded the tiled floor, slipping slightly as she reached the sink. She leaned over it, shaking, sobbing, fumbling for the faucet. The cold water rushed over her hands. She splashed it on her face again and again, hoping to soothe the agony, hoping to stop whatever damage had already been done. But the pain didn't fade, it throbbed deeper. She couldn't look. Not yet. Her mind raced with questions that had no answers. Who was that man? Why her? Why now? Had the old woman known this would happen? 5 minutes passed. 5 long, torturous minutes before Clara could bring herself to lift her head. She gripped the edges of the sink, braced herself, and turned toward the mirror. Her breath caught. She blinked, then blinked again. Her reflection stared back at her. But it was the same face she had seen that morning. Smooth skin, clear eyes. Not a single burn, not even a scratch. She reached up with trembling fingers, touched her cheek, then her chin. She expected to feel rawness, blisters, scarring. But there was nothing. Her skin was fine, unharmed. The water dripped from her jawline. Her tears still clung to her eyelashes, but beneath it all, there was no damage. It didn't make sense. The pain had been real. So real, she thought her face had been destroyed. She had felt the acid burning her skin, smelled it in her nostrils. And now? Now there was nothing to show for it. Then it hit her. The bottle, the oil. The strange woman. Clara staggered back from the sink, her eyes wide, her mind struggling to catch up with the impossible truth. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the little bottle. The seal was broken. The inside was nearly empty. She didn't remember applying it in full. She thought she'd only rubbed a little on her hands and neck while walking towards school. Just enough to satisfy her curiosity, nothing more. But maybe that had been enough. It had saved her. Whatever was in that bottle had protected her. She sat down on the tiled floor, her back against the wall, heart still pounding. A strange mix of emotions surged through her: relief, confusion, dread. Someone had tried to destroy her, not hurt her, not scare her, destroy her. And the only reason they had failed was because of a mysterious woman who had vanished as quickly as she appeared. Clara's thoughts spiraled. Who would hate her enough to do this? She had never harmed anyone. She wasn't perfect, sure, but she had always tried to be kind. Was this jealousy? Was it random? Or was it something darker? She stayed in that bathroom longer than she should have, afraid to step outside, afraid of being seen, afraid of whoever might be waiting. When she finally emerged, the school was still quiet. The first bell hadn't rung yet. No students had arrived. The silence that had unsettled her earlier now felt like a shield. She walked through the hallways, dazed, unsure of her next move. She didn't trust anyone. Not yet. Not until she knew who had done this. Clara reached her locker and opened it with shaky hands. She pulled out a scarphone she had once used as a simple fashion piece and wrapped it tightly around her face. She couldn't risk being recognized. She couldn't risk them knowing she was still beautiful, still whole. Whoever had planned this attack had to believe they'd succeeded. It was the only advantage she had. As she closed her locker and turned toward the classrooms, a new thought entered her mind. If she was going to find the person who did this, if she was going to survive, she had to become someone else. Someone they wouldn't see coming. And so began Clara Monroe's double life. One girl the world thought had been destroyed. And another, hidden behind a scarf and silence, determined to uncover the truth. The next morning, Clara stood in front of her mirror, staring at a face that no longer felt like her own. She touched her cheek again, as if expecting the skin to peel or scar. But it didn't. It was smooth, unbroken, radiant. Not a single trace of acid remained. Not a hint of the pain she had endured the day before. And yet, the fear lingered. Whoever had done this believed they had succeeded. And if they found out she hadn't been disfigured, if they learned she was still here, still whole, they might come back to finish the job. She couldn't take that risk. She opened her closet and reached for the matte black motorcycle helmet her father had once bought on a whim. He'd never used it. It had collected dust for years on the shelf behind her sweaters. Clara held it in her hands, her reflection warping in the curved visor. This was the only way. No one could see her face, not until she knew who was behind the attack. Not until she understood why someone wanted her destroyed. She placed the helmet on her head and latched the chin strap tightly. Her breath echoed inside it. Warm, close, protected. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. When she stepped out of her room, her mother-in-law Marjorie was waiting at the bottom of the grand staircase. Clara didn't know yet what her adoptive mother knew or suspected. She didn't trust anyone now, not even her own family. Marjorie's eyes widened as Clara descended, her gaze fixed on the helmet. "What happened to your face?" she asked, her voice thin with concern, but her expression oddly unreadable. Clara didn't hesitate. "Someone attacked me at school," she said flatly. "They threw acid on me." Marjorie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "My God, Are you okay?" Clara hesitated, then carefully she said, "I don't want to talk about it." She turned toward the door before Marjorie could say anything else. Outside, the morning was brighter than the day before. Too bright. The sunlight felt intrusive. Every face on the street felt like a potential threat. Every glance stung. When she arrived at Blossom Breed High, the hallways were already buzzing with students. Conversations quieted as Clara passed by, the helmet turning heads like a spotlight. Whispers followed her. Why is she wearing that? Did something happen? Is that Clara Monroe? No one dared ask directly. Not yet. But their eyes said everything. She kept walking, shoulders squared, head high. She couldn't afford to flinch, not now, not ever again. In class, her presence was met with confused stares. The girl who had once drawn admiration for her beauty was now an enigma, a mystery wrapped in fiberglass. Gone were the boys who used to smile and wave. Gone were the girls who once complimented her style. In their place were furrowed brows and whispered theories. At lunch, she sat alone, her tray untouched. Across the room, she saw Sophie Langley and Rachel Vance at their usual table, the same two girls she'd known since grade school. Her closest friends, the ones who had been by her side through sleepovers, heartbreaks, birthdays, and yet something inside her had shifted. She no longer looked at them with the same warmth. She no longer felt the same trust, because deep down, a question had taken root in her mind, and it was growing fast. What if it had been one of them? No one knew her better. No one knew her schedule, her habits, the exact path she walked to school each morning. No one had more reason to envy the attention she received. Clara didn't want to believe it. Not Sophie, with her shy smile and nervous laugh. Not Rachel, with her sarcastic humor and always loyal presence. But people change. Jealousy poisons. She remembered the way Sophie used to blush when Tyler Brennan, the most charming boy in their class, flirted with Clara in the hallways. She remembered how Rachel had once said, "Must be nice having every guy trip over their feet when you walk by." It had sounded like a joke, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe the bitterness had been there all along, buried beneath friendship bracelets and late-night calls. The more Clara thought about it, the more the pieces refused to fit. She needed proof. She needed truth. The next few days were torture. She moved through school like a shadow, wrapped in silence and suspicion. Her helmet became a wall keeping the world out, and her thoughts in. One afternoon, as she walked to biology class, someone bumped into her. Hard. "Watch it," a voice muttered. Clara turned, expecting an accident, but it wasn't. It was Naomi Hughes. Quiet classmate, always observant, rarely involved. Naomi leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Stay away from your friends." Clara's heart stuttered. "And what did you say?" But Naomi was already walking away, slipping into the crowd like a ghost. Clara stood frozen. What did she mean? What did Naomi know? She looked back across the hallway. Sophie and Rachel were laughing at something, heads tilted together, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and Clara was no longer sure who she could trust. Not them. Not her family, not even herself. The only thing she knew now was that someone wanted her gone. And she was going to find out who. It happened on a Tuesday. One of those afternoons when the heat lingered a little too long in the hallways and everyone seemed sluggish, waiting for the final bell to ring. Clara was walking home with Sophie and Rachel, as they always had. 3 girls, shoulder to shoulder, once inseparable. The rhythm of their friendship had been familiar. Sophie always a step behind, Rachel always teasing. Clara, in the center, without ever trying to be. She kept her helmet on, as she had since the attack. People still stared, but she was getting used to it. The whispers had dulled into background noise. The eyes that once sparkled at her presence now slid away. The invisible walls had grown thicker. "Hey, can I talk to you for a sec?" The voice came from behind. Clara turned, surprised. Tyler Brennan. He was walking toward them, the sun casting long shadows on the pavement behind him. Clara felt Sophie and Rachel freeze at her side. Tyler had always been the boy that made girls stop mid-sentence. Charming, kind, effortlessly smart. Clara had once liked him, though she'd never said it out loud. She watched as Tyler stopped in front of them, then looked straight at Sophie. "Are you talking to me?" Sophie asked, sounding uncertain. Tyler nodded. "Yeah." "Just for a moment." Clara stepped back instinctively, giving them space. Rachel did too. Sophie moved closer, and Clara caught the brief flicker of hope in her eyes. For a moment, it looked like something special was about to happen. Then Tyler reached into his backpack, pulled out a folded note and said, "I was wondering if you could give this to Clara for me." Sophie blinked. "Oh. You want me to give this to her?" He smiled gently. "Yeah. I was going to tell her myself, but I lost my nerve." Clara stood there, heart suddenly light, surprised, flattered, unsure what to feel. She didn't move, didn't say a word. She just watched as Sophie took the letter with both hands. "I'll make sure she gets it," Sophie said, her voice soft, but something in her smile didn't reach her eyes. Tyler gave her a grateful nod and turned away. Rachel immediately leaned in with wide eyes. "What was that? Tell me everything." Sophie hesitated, then looked at Clara, then at Rachel. She slipped the letter into her backpack with practiced ease. "He said he likes me," Sophie said, smiling. Clara's breath caught. She didn't speak. She didn't react. She just walked beside them, pretending not to feel the sting that bloomed beneath her ribs, pretending not to notice the way Sophie's hand hovered protectively over her bag. Later that night, Clara sat on her bedroom floor, still in her school uniform, the helmet resting beside her. She couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the moment Tyler had handed over the letter. The way Sophie had hesitated, the flicker of guilt, the lie that followed. And Clara knew. The letter wasn't meant for Sophie. It never had been. She had seen the way Tyler looked at her, heard the sincerity in his voice. The letter was hers. But now it was gone. Another piece of her life stolen in silence. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. Maybe it had always been there, Sophie's resentment. Clara had just been too trusting, too blind to see it. The little glances, the way Sophie would always shrink in her shadow, the way compliments about Clara's looks would make Sophie quiet. Clara thought about all the moments they had shared. Sleepovers with popcorn and whispered secrets. Projects where they stayed up all night. How Sophie used to call her my sister from another mystery, and now this, a lie, a stolen chance. Clara didn't cry, not yet, but something inside her shifted again. A tightening, a resolve. The next few days were a test of her own restraint. She walked beside Sophie and Rachel as usual, nodding, laughing when appropriate, pretending, always pretending. Sophie didn't mention the letter, didn't offer any explanation, and Clara didn't ask. Not yet. She needed to see more, to know how deep this betrayal ran. But it wasn't just the lie about Tyler, it was the timing, the fact that it happened right before the attack. It made her stomach twist. Was Sophie's jealousy limited to high school crushes, or had it spilled over into something darker? That question haunted Clara as she watched her two former friends huddled together in the hallways, whispering, occasionally glancing her way. Then came the warning. Clara was walking through the school garden, trying to catch a quiet moment before biology. The roses had started to bloom early that year. Their scent was heavy in the air. That's when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. It was Naomi Hughes. Again. The same girl who had warned her once before. Naomi looked nervous, her eyes darting toward the nearby hedges. "There's something you need to know," she said quickly. "Stay away from them, Sophie and Rachel. They're not who you think they are." Clara's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" Naomi glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in. "Because you deserve to know. You think they're your friends, but they're not. Not anymore." Before Clara could ask more, Naomi was gone, vanished into the maze of green. Clara stood there alone, staring at the flowers. The garden suddenly didn't feel so peaceful. She turned around slowly. Across the lawn, Sophie and Rachel were calling out to her, waving her over. She hesitated. For the first time in her life, Clara didn't want to walk toward them. She wanted to walk away. But she couldn't, not yet. She needed answers, and she was getting closer to the truth. Clara had learned to observe in silence. Since the attack, and especially since discovering Sophie's lie about Tyler's letter, she had stopped speaking as much. She smiled less. She watched more. She was learning that people revealed their truest selves when they thought no one was paying attention. It was during one of those quiet observations that Clara saw something she couldn't ignore. It was early morning. She had arrived at school before most students, as she always did now. Her helmet fogged slightly from the warm breath inside it, but she could still see clearly. As she turned the corner toward her classroom, she spotted Sophie crouched beside Rachel's backpack, fumbling with something small and folded. A note. Clara's steps slowed. Her gaze narrowed behind the visor. Sophie's eyes darted around, scanning the hallway nervously. Then she slipped the note into Rachel's bag and zipped it shut. Clara stood perfectly still, hidden just enough behind the corner to remain unnoticed. She waited until Sophie stood and turned around. Their eyes met. Sophie jumped. "Oh, Clara!" "I didn't see you there," she said with a breathless laugh, her fingers twitching. "I was just putting back a textbook I borrowed from Rachel." Clara didn't blink. "A textbook?" she asked, voice flat through the helmet. Sophie nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yeah, from yesterday. I forgot to return it." Before Clara could respond, Sophie grabbed her arm and steered her down the hallway. "Come on," she said, still smiling. "We'll be late for assembly." But Clara had seen enough. She waited. She bided her time. When the school gathered for the usual morning announcements, Clara made her move. She slipped away quietly while the students were distracted. Her feet carried her back down the empty hallway toward the classroom. Rachel's bag was exactly where Sophie had left it. Clara moved fast, her fingers searching inside until they found the note. It was short, written in Sophie's handwriting. "Meet me at the girls' restroom by 12:30 today. Come alone." Clara folded the note and tucked it into her own pocket. She didn't know what they were planning, but this, whatever it was, would be her chance. By 12:25, Clara was already in the restroom, tucked silently behind the door of a stall, phone in hand, set to record. She had never imagined herself hiding in bathrooms to eavesdrop, but nothing about her life had been normal lately. At exactly 12:30, the door opened. Sophie's voice was the first thing Clara heard. "She's different now," Sophie said. "Ever since the accident, she barely talks. It's like she's not even the same person." Rachel sighed. "Do you think she knows?" "No," Sophie replied. "How could she?" "I never gave her the letter." There it was. Clara's hand gripped the phone tighter. "I feel bad," Sophie continued, her voice lower now, softer. "I was jealous, okay? Tyler liked her. He always liked her. I wanted to be noticed for once. I thought maybe if I kept the letter, he'd look at me instead." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, "That was cruel, Soph." "I know," Sophie whispered. "I know it was. And now it's too late. Even if I gave it to her now, it wouldn't matter. Tyler thinks she rejected him. And after what happened to her face, he'll never come near her again." They didn't laugh. They didn't gloat. In fact, Sophie sounded genuinely guilty. But for Clara, it didn't matter. She had hoped, deep down, that her friends had nothing to do with the pain she had suffered, that the darkness in her life had come from somewhere outside her circle. But now she knew. Sophie had lied because of jealousy. Because of a boy. She had chosen to keep Clara in the dark, to steal even a small piece of happiness from her. The girls lingered for a moment, then left the restroom. Clara stayed behind. She didn't follow. She couldn't. Her mind was spinning, not because of the letter, not because of Tyler, but because the conversation confirmed something deeper. They had resented her. Both of them. Maybe not enough to throw acid, maybe not enough to physically harm her, but enough to lie. Enough to let her fall. Clara stepped out of the stall, her reflection in the mirror meeting her gaze behind the black visor. The helmet had become more than protection. It had become a boundary, a barrier, a symbol of everything she had lost and everything she still needed to uncover. She replayed the audio. Her thumb hovered over the save button. Then she paused. What good would it do? This wasn't justice. It wasn't the confession she wanted. They hadn't mentioned the masked man. They hadn't spoken of the oil, or the pain, or the plan. No clues, no leads, just the truth of a broken friendship, delivered in hushed tones over tiled floors and dripping faucets. Clara slipped the phone back into her pocket. She didn't confront them. Not yet. There was a bigger enemy out there, a faceless one, someone who had tried to take her face away and nearly succeeded. And now, with Sophie and Rachel off the suspect list, she had to start asking herself the most terrifying question yet. If it wasn't them, then who was it? It was a grey afternoon, one of those days where the sun never quite breaks through the clouds and the air carries a chill that settles deep in your bones. Clara had stayed late at school, lingering in the empty library long after the final bell. She didn't want to go home, not today, not with so many questions unanswered. Not with the weight of everything she had overheard pressing on her chest. She stepped outside, her helmet snug around her head, muffling the sound of the wind. She didn't expect to see the car waiting. A familiar black sedan parked along the curb, engine humming softly. Clara slowed, confused. Her father, Edward, never sent the car for her after school. That wasn't their routine. He always insisted she take the driver's shuttle in the morning and walk home in the afternoons. It kept her grounded, he said. It kept her safe. Still, the car looked like theirs. Same license plate. Same tinted windows. The back door clicked open automatically, inviting her in. She hesitated. Then she stepped inside. The door shut behind her. She settled into the seat, expecting to see Robert, the long-time family driver, behind the wheel. But what she saw instead made her stomach drop. 2 men, both masked. Both silent, one driving, one in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. Panic surged up Clara's spine. "This isn't my car," she said quickly. "You have the wrong person." No answer. "Where are you taking me?" Still silence. She reached for the door, but the child lock held firm. Then came the voice, cold and low, from the passenger seat. "If you scream, we throw you out of the moving car." Her throat tightened, her fists clenched. The car sped up, flying down back roads and side streets she didn't recognize. Until she did. They were heading toward her family's private property, toward the estate. But not to the front entrance. The road they took was one she hadn't seen in years, a narrow service lane that led behind the estate to an old building her father used to call the cellar, though it was more of a bunker, a relic from older times. The car rolled to a stop. One man got out and yanked the door open. The other grabbed her by the arm and pulled her to her feet. She didn't fight. Not yet. They led her through a hidden entrance, deep into the belly of the building, through steel doors, and down cold, damp steps. The air was heavy, thick with mildew and something darker. They pushed her into a room with concrete walls and no windows. Then they left. She was alone, or so she thought. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Her thoughts ran in every direction, colliding with fear and disbelief. Who were these men? What did they want? How did they have access to her father's estate? Then she heard the door open. She turned, and her world cracked open. Marjorie Whitmore stepped into the room. Elegant, composed, with her hair pinned neatly and her posture regal, just as it had always been. But her eyes, they were cold, unrecognizable. Clara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Marjorie walked toward her, heels clicking softly on the concrete floor. Then, without a word, she reached forward and removed Clara's helmet. Clara flinched. Her face, once hidden, now exposed. Marjorie didn't flinch. She stared down at Clara with something close to disdain. "I will be the one to end you," she said calmly, pulling a small pistol from her coat. Clara gasped. "What are you doing?" Marjorie didn't answer. Clara stepped back. "Mom?" "Don't call me that," Marjorie snapped. "You're not my daughter." "You never were." The words struck like a slap. Clara's knees buckled, but she caught herself. "You were. You raised me." "I was tricked into raising you," Marjorie hissed. "Your father told me you were an orphan, that we were saving you, that I was doing a good deed." Clara stared at her, heart thudding. "What are you talking about?" Marjorie's lips curled. "You're not an orphan, Clara. You're Lillian's child." The name landed with a thud in Clara's chest. Lillian, the name she had heard only in fragments, a name whispered in the walls of the estate. A maid, long gone. She was nothing, Marjorie said, her voice rising. A servant, a mistake, and your father, he betrayed me with her the night before our wedding. Clara shook her head. That can't be true. He got her pregnant, and then had the gall to bring you back into our home, told me you were some abandoned infant. I believed him, I nursed you, I sang to you. I thought you were mine, until the truth came out. Marjorie's hands were trembling now, her voice cracking. He kept a photograph, a letter, hidden in a drawer. When I found it, everything unraveled. I saw your mother's handwriting. I saw her face. And I knew what he had done. Clara's vision blurred. So you tried to kill me? I tried to erase you, Marjorie spat. With acid, with silence, with time. But you wouldn't die. You kept coming back. The pistol in her hand trembled. Clara took a slow breath. Please, whatever you believe, I didn't ask for any of this. You were the reminder, Marjorie said, her eyes burning, of everything I lost, of every lie, every betrayal. She stepped forward, raising the pistol. Clara's voice cracked. Where's my father? Marjorie paused. And that pause was all Clara needed, because a moment later, before the trigger could be pulled, the door burst open. Voices. Shouts. A rush of light and boots on concrete. Drop the weapon. Now! Marjorie turned, stunned, as officers flooded the room. One of the men tackled her to the ground. The pistol slid across the floor. Clara stood frozen. Then another figure rushed in. Edward Whitmore. Her father. He pulled her into his arms, his voice shaking. I'm here. I'm so sorry. Clara collapsed against him, everything finally unraveling. The mask had come off, and now the real story could begin. The concrete room was quiet now. Marjorie had been disarmed and restrained, her arms pulled tightly behind her back, wrists in steel cuffs. The fury in her eyes hadn't dimmed, but the fight in her body had drained away. Edward, still holding Clara, stood facing his wife now, the woman he had once believed was his life partner. Now, he barely recognized her. Clara's legs trembled, but she stayed standing. I need to know the truth, she said, voice hoarse. No more lies. Marjorie lifted her chin, her lip curled in disgust. You want the truth? She spat. Then listen carefully, because once I say it, you'll never look at either of us the same. Edward stepped forward. Marjorie, don't. But she ignored him. Her eyes locked on Clara's. Your mother's name was Lillian Monroe, she began. She was our housemaid. Quiet, polite, always doing her job with her head down and her hands folded. I never suspected a thing. Her voice turned bitter. Until the night before my wedding, your father was supposed to be mine. I had waited years for that day, but that night he got drunk, said it was nerves. Said he didn't remember anything, but I did. I remembered what I saw the next morning, his clothes rumpled, his excuses shaky. And Lillian? She scoffed. She kept avoiding me like I was a ghost. Edward's face twisted with shame, but he didn't interrupt. 2 months later, I found out she was pregnant. Marjorie continued. Your father swore it was a mistake, that he had no memory of it. that it wasn't what I thought. And you know what the worst part was? He wanted to keep the child. He said we should help her. Raise it together, like one big happy family. Clara's heart pounded in her ears. Lillian gave birth to you alone, Marjorie said, her voice growing colder. Somewhere in the city, far from here. And when she couldn't manage anymore, your father brought you home. Told me you were an orphan. Said you had no one. Said we were saving a life. She leaned forward as far as the cuffs would allow. But you weren't a stray, Clara. You were his, hers, that woman's blood in your veins. And I was supposed to smile? To rock you to sleep while your real mother faded into memory? She shook her head, eyes narrowing. No. I couldn't accept it, so I made a decision. Clara barely breathed. I poisoned her, Marjorie said plainly. Little by little, just enough to weaken her, to make her sick without anyone noticing. She got pale, tired, then frail. No one suspected me. A bitter smile touched her lips. And when she went into labor, I let her leave. I didn't help. I didn't call for a doctor. I stood in the doorway and watched her stumble out of our house, belly full, barely able to walk. She died alone, somewhere in the cold. Edward's voice broke. You told me she ran away, that she left the baby. Marjorie turned to him slowly. I had to tell you something you could believe. You were always too soft, too easy to manipulate. Clara could barely stand. Her fingers trembled at her sides. Her breath came in shallow gasps. You killed her, she whispered. You murdered my mother. Marjorie's gaze didn't falter. I erased a mistake. No, Edward said firmly. You destroyed a woman, a mother, and you've tried to destroy her daughter. He stepped between Clara and Marjorie, shielding his child as if some last instinct had finally taken hold. Marjorie laughed softly, bitterly. You don't get to play the hero now, Edward. You brought that child into our lives. You lied to me for 16 years. You fed her, dressed her, gave her a name and a future. I loved her, he said. I still do. Marjorie's voice dropped to a hiss. Then you're a fool. She looked at Clara once more, her expression hollow. You never should have existed. Clara stepped forward, chin lifted. And yet here I am. The two women stared at each other for a long moment. It was Marjorie who finally looked away. Officers began to move her out of the room. She didn't fight them. She just walked slowly, silently, her expensive heels echoing off the concrete like the end of a parade. When she was gone, Clara turned to her father. His face was pale. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear to you, Clara, I thought we were helping. I never imagined. Clara swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell me about her? About Lillian? Edward sat on the edge of a nearby crate, shoulders slumped. I didn't want to ruin your life with the truth. I thought it would protect you, that if we just moved on, it would fade. But secrets don't die, Clara. They wait. She sat beside him slowly, unsure whether to feel rage or sorrow. She was my mother, Clara said, voice barely above a whisper. Yes. And you let me grow up without knowing anything about her. I did, he admitted, eyes glassy. And I was wrong. Clara looked at her hands, at the fingers that Lillian had given her, at the eyes that no longer looked like Marjorie's. She had lived her entire life in a house where she was loved by the one who had caused her mother's death. nurtured by the hands that had served the poison. And now, everything had changed. Everything except one thing. "I want to know her," Clara said. "Everything. Where she came from, who she was, what she loved, what she dreamed of." Edward nodded. "You will." They sat there in silence, father and daughter, united not by a shared past, but by the decision to face it. The lie had ended, and the truth had finally begun. The scent of antiseptic filled Clara's nose before she opened her eyes. Bright lights pressed against her eyelids, and the beeping of machines kept rhythm with her slow, steady breaths. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it came flooding back: the basement, Marjorie's confession, the way her father's arms had wrapped around her as the officers took that woman away. Now, she was in a hospital bed, wrapped in fresh linen, her father asleep in the armchair beside her. Clara blinked against the light and tried to sit up. Every muscle ached, not from wounds, but from exhaustion. Weeks of fear and hiding had worn her thin. A nurse appeared at the door and smiled gently. "You're safe now, Clara," she said, adjusting Clara's IV. "You've been through a storm, but you're still standing." Clara gave a weak nod, then looked down at her hands. The helmet was gone. The shield was gone, but so was the need for them. Over the next few days, the doctors confirmed what she already knew: her face was untouched. Her skin, flawless. No trace of the acid remained. If not for the nightmares and the tightness in her chest, no one would believe anything had happened at all. She overheard the nurses whispering in the hallway. "That poor girl," one said. "She's the Whitmore child, right?" "No, the Monroe child," the other whispered. "Turns out she's not who everyone thought she was." Clara lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling tiles, wondering who she really was now. Lillian Monroe's daughter, not a Whitmore. Not the darling of Blossom Breed High, just Clara, a girl with a mother stolen too soon. A past rewritten, a life scarred not by acid, but by betrayal. And yet, she was still here. When she was discharged, Edward insisted on driving her home himself. No chauffeurs, no servants. Just the two of them, riding in silence through streets that looked strangely different now. "Are you sure you're ready to go back to school?" he asked as they pulled into the estate driveway. Clara nodded. "I have to. I can't hide anymore." He gave her a long look. "You're stronger than I ever imagined." She gave a half smile. "I had to be." 2 days later, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her long hair and tying it back. No helmet, no disguise. The face staring back at her was hers again. Still Clara, but not the same girl. She put on a simple dress, something she hadn't worn since before everything fell apart. Light blue, with a small embroidered rose on the collar. Lillian would have liked this, she thought. It felt quiet, soft, honest. As she walked to school, the spring wind lifted the hem of her skirt and rustled the trees above. The world looked brighter. Or maybe it was just her. The moment she stepped through the school gates, the world stopped. Students turned. Some gasped. It was as if someone had dropped a stone in the center of a silent lake. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "Is that her? Clara Monroe? No Clara Monroe now, didn't you hear?" And then, "She's not wearing the helmet." Clara walked slowly, her shoulders straight, her chin high. Not in arrogance, but in strength. She passed a group of boys who once followed her with dreamy eyes. Now, they stood speechless, their expressions flickering with something like shame. She passed teachers who had once doted on her, only to ignore her when the helmet hid her beauty. Now their smiles returned, but they no longer meant anything. She reached her classroom just as the bell rang. Inside, she paused at the door. Every head turned. Then she stepped in. It was Sophie who gasped first. Clara saw her freeze, pencil slipping from her hand. Rachel blinked in disbelief, her mouth slightly open. Neither spoke. Clara walked to her usual seat, the one near the window, and sat down, quietly. The teacher entered, breaking the moment, but the whispers didn't stop. They just softened. Clara opened her notebook and stared at the blank page. But it didn't feel blank, not anymore. Later that day, as she walked down the corridor toward her locker, Sophie approached her. She looked nervous, unsure, eyes darting toward the students around them. "Clara," she began, "you look—" Clara turned, raising a brow. "Alive?" Sophie's face reddened. "Yes, that too. I mean, beautiful." "Just like before." Clara didn't smile. "Before what?" she asked. Sophie looked down. "Before I lied to you. Before I let jealousy get the better of me." Clara was silent for a moment. "I'm not here to relive what's already behind us," she said. "But I remember." Sophie nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes," Sophie whispered. "And I'm sorry." Clara didn't answer right away. Then she reached into her locker, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and handed it to her. It was Tyler's original letter. "I found it in your bag," Clara said. "The day after you said he liked you." Sophie took it with trembling fingers. Clara stepped back. "Whatever you do with it now is your choice." Then she turned and walked away. As she moved down the hallway, her eyes caught a glimpse of something near the school garden. An older woman, dressed in white, standing in the shadow of the magnolia tree. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Then she was gone. But Clara smiled, because somewhere, somehow, she knew Lillian Monroe was still watching. Not far. Not close. Just close enough. For the rest of the school day, Clara moved through the halls like a figure newly carved from stone, still her, but redefined. She smiled politely when necessary, answered questions when called on, but mostly kept to herself. The buzz had quieted now. The initial shock of seeing her without the helmet had passed, leaving behind curiosity, admiration, and something else. Respect. But Clara wasn't looking for admiration anymore. She was looking for peace. After the final bell rang, Clara packed her books slowly, watching the classroom empty one student at a time. She wasn't in a rush. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the need to escape. She had just zipped her bag closed when she noticed them standing at the door. Sophie and Rachel. They didn't speak right away. Sophie fidgeted with the strap of her bag, while Rachel stared at the floor as if it held all the words she couldn't say. Clara waited. Finally, Sophie stepped forward. "We were hoping we could talk," she said quietly. Clara gave a slow nod. "Okay." They moved to the benches behind the school gym, a quiet place, shaded by old oaks that had stood longer than any of them had been alive. Clara sat on one end. Sophie and Rachel sat across from her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Rachel took a deep breath. "We were jealous," she said. There's no excuse. We let something ugly grow between us. And we hurt you. Sophie nodded. When Tyler gave me that letter, I wanted it to be for me. Just once, I wanted someone to choose me over you. Her voice cracked. But it was wrong, she continued. And I knew it the moment I lied. I thought it would fade. That maybe I'd stop feeling guilty, but I didn't. Rachel added, and when the accident happened, when we thought you'd been scarred, I didn't know what to do. We didn't know if it was because of us. But we were too scared to ask, too ashamed. Clara sat very still. She had imagined this moment before dozens of times, in her mind, in her dreams. Sometimes she yelled, sometimes she cried, sometimes she turned away without a word. But now, looking at the two girls she had once trusted like sisters, she didn't feel anger. She just felt tired and free. I won't pretend it didn't hurt, Clara said softly. Finding out the truth, knowing what you kept from me, it broke something I thought we had. Sophie wiped at her eyes. Rachel looked away. But, Clara continued, I've learned a lot these past few weeks. About masks, about beauty, about people. She leaned forward. And the truth is, I wasn't perfect either. I didn't know how my presence made others feel. I never meant to stand above anyone. I just was. Sophie nodded slowly. You didn't deserve what happened to you, she whispered. Clara offered a faint smile. No one does. They sat in silence for a while, letting the words settle, letting the hurt slowly lift like morning fog. Then Clara reached into her backpack and pulled out a small photo. It was old, slightly faded, a picture of a young woman with warm eyes and a kind smile. This is my mother, Clara said, passing the photo to them. Her name was Lillian Monroe. She worked for my family. She died giving birth to me, and I only just learned the truth. Sophie and Rachel leaned in, carefully holding the photo. She looks kind, Rachel said quietly. She was, Clara replied. She didn't get to raise me, but I think she's been with me in other ways. Watching, protecting, reminding me what matters. She took a breath. And what matters is forgiveness. Sophie looked up, eyes wide. You mean, you forgive us? I do, Clara said. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to let go. Holding on to what you did, it only gives it power. And I'm done giving my pain to other people. A breeze moved through the trees above them, scattering a few dry leaves across the ground. The sun was lower now, casting golden lines through the branches. Rachel sniffled, then smiled through her tears. You've always been stronger than us. No, Clara said. I'm just finally learning what strength really is. It's not in having people adore you. It's in facing the truth. And choosing not to become bitter because of it. Sophie reached across the table, her fingers hesitant. Clara took her hand. Rachel reached too, and soon the three of them sat, hand in hand, bound by something deeper than shared memories. Bound by healing. Clara looked at them both and said, Let's not pretend everything's back to how it was. Let's build something better. Something honest. If we're going to be friends again, I want it to be real. They nodded. Real, Rachel echoed. Always, Sophie whispered. The bell tower chimed in the distance, a soft, lingering sound that marked the end of the school day. They stood together, walked side by side, no longer as girls competing for attention or hiding behind secrets, but as young women beginning again, wiser, wounded, but not broken. And for the first time, in what felt like a lifetime, Clara smiled without fear. Not because the world was perfect, but because she knew she didn't need to face it alone. The days that followed moved gently. Clara felt lighter, not just because the helmet was gone, or because Sophie and Rachel had made peace, but because, for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. Not in the way that makes your chest ache at night or your mind wander into dark corners. She had begun to sleep better, to breathe easier, but something still tugged at her soul. Not fear. Not grief, something else, a presence. It was a subtle thing, like the way sunlight filtered through her curtains just when she needed comfort, or the scent of lavender on her pillow when she hadn't placed it there. Little things, moments so soft they could be dismissed unless you were looking, and Clara had started to look. It began the night she returned to the old attic room, the one where her father stored keepsakes and long-forgotten belongings. She hadn't been up there in years, but something had nudged her, a quiet whisper inside her heart. She opened the attic door slowly. Dust filled the air like old secrets rising. She stepped carefully through boxes of childhood toys and stacks of yellowed books. Toward the back corner, under a heavy sheet, she found an old trunk, the kind with brass corners and a rusted lock. It wasn't locked now. She lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in a graceful hand that looped gently as if each word was laid down with care. At the top of the pile was an envelope, marked with a name she had only recently learned to call her own. To Clara, if you ever find me. Her hands trembled as she opened it. My sweet girl, if this letter has found you, then the truth has too. I am Lillian Monroe, your mother. I never wanted to leave you, not for a single moment. But life, it doesn't always let us choose how we love, only that we love at all. From the moment I felt you move inside me, I knew I would do anything to protect you. I carried you through cold nights and long days, through silence and shame, through hope and heartbreak. And even now, wherever I am still carrying you. Clara wiped her tears with the back of her hand and kept reading. The world is not always kind to girls like us, but I believe in your strength. I believe in your light. And if ever a day comes when you feel lost, when shadows surround you, look for me. I will be near. Not far, not close, just close enough. With all my love, Lillian. The letter fell softly onto her lap as Clara sobbed quietly into the stillness of the attic. She stayed there for hours. Later that night, as the house settled and the wind brushed against the windows, Clara sat at her vanity, brushing her hair just as she imagined Lillian might have done. She reached for the bottle of oil, the one the old woman had given her that morning, long ago, before the attack. She had kept it hidden, wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her drawer. Now, as she uncorked it, the scent of wildflowers and something earthy filled the air. Suddenly, the lamp on her nightstand flickered. Clara froze. A chill danced up her spine, but she didn't feel afraid. The air in the room shifted, not colder, not warmer, just fuller, as if someone else had entered, someone she couldn't see. She stood slowly and turned toward the window. And there she was, a figure, faint and glowing, standing under the old magnolia tree. Clara didn't blink. She knew it was her. Lillian, not a ghost, not something from a horror story, but something else, a light, a soul. a guardian. The woman looked, just as she had in the photograph, gentle, graceful, with eyes that held the weight of love that time couldn't touch. They stared at each other through the glass. No words, no sound, just presence. Clara pressed a hand to her chest. "You've been with me," she whispered, "this whole time." And though no voice answered, her heart understood. Yes, Lillian had never left her, not when the acid came. Not when she cried alone in the bathroom, fearing what she'd become. Not when she wore the helmet, hiding from a world that once adored her. She had been there, in the quiet, in the courage, in every breath Clara had fought to take. Outside, the figure smiled softly, then turned and faded into the mist. But Clara didn't feel loss. She felt peace. She knew now that she was more than a girl who had survived betrayal. She was the daughter of a woman who had loved beyond death. And that kind of love didn't disappear. It lived in every step Clara took, in every truth she spoke, in every time she chose forgiveness over fury. That night, as she turned off her lamp and climbed into bed, she didn't feel alone. Not anymore. The auditorium was full. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden beams over rows of students in deep blue robes and parents seated in neat, buzzing rows. The scent of fresh flowers and polished wood filled the space. Somewhere near the back, a piano played soft notes as the ceremony began. Clara Monroe stood backstage, her hands folded in front of her gown, heart beating in her chest like a quiet drum. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was something more sacred. Readiness. Her name was last on the list, the final speech of the day selected not just for her academic record, but for something no one could quite define. Maybe it was what she'd endured, or how she carried herself now. Maybe people had simply seen something different in her since that day she returned without the helmet. Whatever the reason, Clara had been given the honor of closing the graduation ceremony. And this time, she had something to say. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she stepped onto the stage. Her eyes scanned the sea of faces, students she had once called friends, teachers who had watched her rise and fall and rise again. And near the center, her father, Edward Whitmore, sat with tears already welling in his eyes. Clara took a breath, then another. And then she began. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clara Monroe. Some of you may know me by another name. Some may have forgotten me altogether. And that's okay. Because today isn't about who I used to be, it's about who I've become." The room quieted. No one whispered. No one stirred. A few months ago, I would have stood here thinking only about what you saw when you looked at me. My hair, my face, my clothes. I lived for approval, for attention. For a version of love that disappears the moment you fall from the pedestal others put you on. But life has a way of shaking you awake. She paused, scanning the room. Some of you know I disappeared for a while. I wore a helmet. I stopped speaking, and most people assumed it was vanity or shame or even madness. But the truth is, I was hiding from something far more painful. I was hiding from a betrayal, from a world that tried to take away not just my face, but my worth. She let the words land. That world failed. Because I'm still here. There was a soft murmur of agreement. A few students nodded. A teacher dabbed at her eyes. I won't share every detail. Some wounds aren't meant for public display, but I will tell you this. I was raised in a lie. I believed someone loved me who, in truth, never did. And I only survived because someone else loved me so deeply, so fiercely, that not even death could keep her from protecting me. Clara's voice trembled slightly. She steadied herself. Her name was Lillian Monroe. She was my mother. Gasps rippled through the audience, soft and stunned. I never got to hold her hand. Never heard her sing me to sleep. She didn't leave behind wealth or fame. She left behind something more powerful, a legacy of love that reached beyond the grave. Clara lifted her gaze. She watched over me when I didn't even know her name. She saved my life not just once, but again and again. Through the kindness of strangers, through quiet signs, through strength I didn't know I had. The auditorium was silent. Some say beauty is a blessing. Some say it's a curse. But I've learned that true beauty has nothing to do with what we wear or how we look. True beauty is how we choose to rise when the world has done everything to break us. She looked toward her father. To those who stood by me, I thank you. To those who hurt me, I forgive you, because I will not carry your bitterness into my future. A hush. Then Clara smiled. It wasn't the smile people once complimented for being flawless. It was something deeper, something earned. To my classmates, as we step into the next chapter of our lives, I ask you to remember this. Be kind. Look past the surface. Don't wait until someone wears a helmet to ask if they're okay. Laughter mingled with tears. And finally, to my mother, wherever you are, thank you. I feel you in every breath. In every quiet moment, in every time, I choose courage instead of silence. She paused, then closed with a whisper. You never left me, and I will never stop walking in your light. A single clap broke the silence. Then another. And then the room stood. A standing ovation for the girl who had once hidden her face, who now stood, radiant and whole, in front of the world. As she stepped down from the stage, Clara saw a familiar figure standing by the exit. An older woman, eyes soft, smile warm. She looked exactly like the photo Clara had found in the attic. Clara blinked, and she was gone. But the warmth remained, because some love is eternal. Not loud. Not flashy, just close enough, always. Clara Monroe's journey is a reminder that true strength doesn't come from how the world sees us, but from how we choose to respond when the world turns away. For older American audiences, this story speaks to the power of resilience, forgiveness, and enduring love, values that grow deeper with time. Clara was raised in lies, hurt by those closest to her, yet she chose not to be defined by betrayal. Instead, she chose truth. She chose to forgive. And in doing so, she discovered the legacy of a mother who protected her even from beyond the grave. This story gently reminds us that beauty fades, fame passes, but kindness, character, and the quiet courage to heal, those are what endure. In our later years, when we reflect on life, we see more clearly that the invisible acts of love, the silent sacrifices, and the strength to forgive are what truly shape our legacy. Like Clara, we are all walking through shadows. But some shadows carry light, and some love, the kind that truly matters, never leaves us.